This episode is brought to you by Amazon. Sometimes the most painful part of getting sick is the getting better part. Waiting on hold for an appointment, sitting in crowded waiting rooms, standing in line at the pharmacy, that's painful. Amazon One Medical and Amazon Pharmacy remove those painful parts of getting better with things like 24/7 virtual visits and prescriptions delivered to your door. Thanks to Amazon Pharmacy and Amazon One Medical, healthcare just got less painful.
You're listening to the Reversing Climate Change podcast by the team at Nori, the carbon removal marketplace. This is a show about the innovators and entrepreneurs developing solutions to climate change.
Hello and welcome to the Reversing Climate Change podcast with Nori. I'm Ross Kenny, and I'm one of the co-founders of Nori, which is a carbon removal marketplace based in Seattle. Today, I have with me Asa Kamer, the producer of Carbon Removal Newsroom, our sister podcast, which is an amazing weekly, bi-weekly news panelist kind of show, all the latest in carbon removal. Is that what you say? Something like that?
Well, it's 3 times a month, so there's not really a good shorthand
word for that. Yeah.
Is there?
Tri-monthly?
Tri-monthly. It's a tri-monthly show, and you guys should check it out.
The world's best tri-monthly carbon removal news podcast.
People will be so curious about what that even means, they'll have to Google it.
And Siobhan Montoya Lavender from Thanks a Ton, and also Nori's Meme Lab, which I don't know if you follow at Carbon Removal Memes on Twitter, but Siobhan and Ace actually both work on that. Among a couple
if you don't follow, why? Do you not like to laugh and carbon removal?
Do you not like to laugh or like lightly chuckle and then scroll past?
Or not laugh at all and just go,
Yeah. And there's some of those.
I'm excited to doom scroll some memes now.
All right. Also,
there. Yeah, go ahead.
Also with us today, we have Mike Allen, who is the Chief Science Officer, and Patty Estridge, who is the CEO of a wonderful and new startup called Seaweed Generation. And they're going to be talking to us today about their project and about how we're going to use the power of seaweed in the ocean to reverse climate change. Welcome.
Thanks for having us. It's awesome to be here.
Yeah, great to be here.
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of your technology. And I particularly like, as you've described it, as like a Pac-Man style robots that eat seaweed. So what does that mean for our audience? What is this technology you've developed, and why do you see its potential?
That's a good opener. So I describe it usually as like a Pac-Man meets a Roomba. So it's kind of a big Pac-Man like mouth, but it does the function of a Roomba in the ocean for the stinky seaweed blobs that we've seen coming through in the Central Atlantic region called Sargassum.
Anything to add, Mike? Is that a pretty succinct synopsis?
It's a great synopsis, but I don't like the Pac-Man analogy. I like WALL-E because I think it's a bit more of a lovable robot. So we're a bit more like WALL-E, I think, where we collect up the seaweed and then put it in the deep sea.
Oh, so you just need to cube it. You need to cube it now.
Exactly.
Mike likes his technology cute.
It's got a googly eyes and be lovable. So I think a lot of what we're doing, you really have to involve the public, and to get the public to connect to what you're doing, you have to sort of really make it engaging. So it's not just about having a successful technology, it's also about telling our story as well.
Which public? Do you mean just general environmentally concerned people or locals where you're doing this activity? Both?
Yeah, both. I think we've got to engage with sort of the local communities that we're helping out, but ultimately this is a global problem, and we need to engage with a global community. So having things that people can understand, and our process is very, very simple. How we can explain that, and you can explain that to a child as well as an adult. So that's really important for us.
Yeah, let's zoom out for just a minute and tell the audience, what is the virtue of sinking seaweed? For those, maybe people have heard of Running Tide or other companies, maybe they haven't. What is the virtue for carbon dioxide removal of sinking seaweed?
So in this case, there's a couple of virtues, I suppose. The first is that carbon dioxide removal, as we know, probably most people who are listening to this know that we would need to get to a very, very huge amount every year, around 10 billion tons by 2050 of additional removal from the atmosphere. So carbon dioxide coming from the atmosphere and going somewhere that isn't the atmosphere anymore. And for that, seaweed and using oceans can be incredibly scalable. That's a massive number. So if you're looking for something that's going to get to that point of like 1, 2, 3, maybe more gigatons a year, then seaweed and biomass in the ocean is one of the things that can be really scalable. And at the same time, we have this enormous, massive amount of seaweed, which is growing naturally as a response to climate change in the Central Atlantic, which in an area called the Central Atlantic Sargassum Belt, or it's now being termed that because there's so much sargassum growing in it. And that's what's now being talked about as the seaweed blob, which is twice the width of America at the moment. Mike, is that right?
Something like that. Yeah. I think about 5,000 meters long.
Yeah,
5,000 meters is what I've heard. Yeah,
it's absolutely ginormous, and it's happening because of climate change, because of fertilizer runoff, soil runoff, sewage runoff, and different changes that we're seeing in the global ecosystem. And that sargassum is coming into coast on a massive, massive scale. It's rotting, creating anoxic zone, dumping out a whole bunch of arsenic because it's really good at absorbing arsenic as it's growing. And that is a really, really good candidate for us to stop that from happening and to conduct carbon dioxide removal with our Wally Roomba Pac-Man, which we actually call the algae. And I call our prototype is Alfie. So Alfie the algae is going to grow up and learn how to intercept and sink this stinky seaweed before it can get to the coast and cause problems. And through doing that, we can learn a lot about what the parameters of carbon dioxide removal with seaweed more broadly could be.
As the scientist, I need to say it's not stinky when we intercept it. It only gets stinky when it gets coastal and it starts rotting, and then it really, really does stink. But when it's out in the open ocean, it's wonderful seaweed. It's beautifully healthy. The problem is when it goes coastal, it becomes a problem. So
yeah. So what we're doing is stopping it from getting to the rotting bit. It's glorious, beautiful seaweed.
Given the magnitude of this blob, how can I'm not actually sure if it is Wally sized. What even is Pac-Man sized, given that it's literal digital representation? How could that possibly make a dent in such an enormous blob? How many Wallies do there need to be?
We're starting out with our current, Alfie is 2 meters by 4 meters, about half a meter deep. When he grows up, he'll be a pretty large, maybe less cute version. He's going to be around 10 meters by 4 meters and 1.5 meters deep, and will take about 16 tons of sargassum every time it does a drop, and it'll be able to do that around 4 to 6 times an hour. So at around 25% capacity rate, it will be able to remove around 8,000 tons of carbon dioxide a year, sink 80,000 tons of sargassum. So to clean up like everything that there is in the Central Atlantic region, you'd need around 1,000 of them. I don't think you'd want to go that big that fast. What we're trying to do is learn about carbon dioxide removal with seaweed and stop the coastal damage at this current stage.
But the challenge is massive, but by breaking it down into tiny little bloblets, we can meet the challenge, I hope. So
we should write a children's book, Alfie and the Bloblets.
Yes.
Great content marketing idea.
Yeah.
It could be a cartoon book that comes out tri-monthly.
I love marketing ideas that are like intentionally old school. I'm always like, can we send someone like a fruit basket? I always want to do ideas like that.
Oh yeah.
Publishing a serialized comic book is a very clever idea that appeals to me. With coastal damage, though, I read Wide Sargassum Sea in high school when I read Jane Eyre, and since then, this is the first time I've heard anyone talk about sargassum. So, what even happens? What happens to the coast if you just let this blob run wild?
The Sargassum Sea is a great topic to bring up here, because the Sargassum Sea is the only sea that's actually defined, which has no land boundaries. It's actually just a mass of water. So it's kind of circulating around. It's very stable. It's a beautiful area full of wildlife. But what we're talking about with the Great Atlantic Sargassum Belt is seaweed that has probably come out of that and then has seeded an entirely new region of the ocean. And as Paddy said earlier, with ocean acidification and the warming of the oceans, as well as all that nutrient runoff, we're now fueling seaweed growth in different areas. So it's going from the west coast of Africa, it's growing all the way across the Atlantic, and then it's sweeping into the sort of Gulf of Mexico, and then it's hitting the land, and that's where it's causing a problem, because of course the Sargasso Sea constantly moving around, but ultimately it stays in the same place. This stuff is moving across, and when it hits the coast, that's when you're getting all your problems.
Yeah. So I was actually just recently down in the Yucatan Peninsula and in Quintana Roo, and it was Sargassum City. And I talked to some friends about it. So a friend of mine owns an apartment down there and invited us down. and was saying how much money that the hotels and the government is spending to clean up the sargassum. And I found one statistic here that says it's costing about $1 million for offshore sargassum barriers, and that they can run up to $100 per linear foot. And so and then there's also hotels that are spending thousands of dollars daily, if not weekly, to just hire people to shovel sargassum off the beaches. They're also doing like clever things like, undercutting beaches so that there's like a shelf that catches the sargassum, so that there's a strip of clean beach, because it really is just flooding these beaches. And to Mike's point, it might not be smelly in the ocean where it's beautiful and great habitat, but on the beach, it is rotting and it does not smell good.
You've got a health impact there with those noxious gases coming off to humans. But I mean, probably the bigger impact is on the sort of coastal erosion as you're removing it. You're also smothering coral reefs. You're sort of causing massive anoxic zones. As it rots, all those nutrients go back in and fuels microbial growth. It's an absolutely horrible situation.
Yeah, it really is. And so there's all sorts of, people out there trying to use barges and shoveling and whatever they can to get this out. It seems like a real opportunity for potentially multiple revenue streams. First of all, we talk a lot about CDR needing multiple revenue streams, and I'm sure somebody would want to at least let you, but more likely even pay you to clean this stuff up for them. Have you found that to be the case?
Yeah, I mean, I worked for quite a few years trying to find some value in the sargassum biomass, trying to convert it into fuels, fertilizers, feeds, things like that. The problem is that Paddy alluded to earlier is a lot of the heavy metals in it make it very difficult to do anything like that. There are lots of really cool entrepreneurs out there trying to sort of do something valuable with it, making it into tourist items and things like that, and even bricks to make houses. The problem is with millions and millions of tons turning up, and in different locations, you can't control where it's going to go, when it's going to go. There's so many variables. So to create a sort of a sustainable industrial process is very, very challenging with this biomass because it's so uncontrollable. And when it is there, it's kind of overwhelms you. So it's kind of, it's feast and famine, really, which is really difficult to create sustainable industries around it. So that's why with our approach of intercepting it offshore, it's always going to be there and you can track it from space. So you sort of get rid of all those variables, really.
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, or we can work with the variables that it offers us. I think to go back to the multiple revenue stream question, I think there's definitely potential there. At the moment, we're more in the realm of fielding invitations to go and, participate and test and do pilots in different areas. And we're quite of the mind that this is like another climate change disaster that's hitting these nations, and not all of them have the money to do anything about it. In fact, very few of them do. So a lot of our modeling is around revenue sharing with nations who are looking at trying to do something about this, trying to, I suppose, unleash or leverage their blue economies where they have them. There's certainly, I would say we're certainly of the mind that there could be a secondary revenue stream, but we're very conscious of things like climate justice, the poverty of a lot of these places, the fact that a lot of them have actually just abandoned the coasts that are being inundated with sargassum, and a lot of that tourism has been shut down. The Mexican region that you were in is certainly one of them that is actually kind of engaging with and spending a lot of money and fighting back and trying to do things like dig away parts of their beach, which is probably going to cause a ton of erosion over time. So there's definitely, it's sort of, we haven't found like a one size fits all kind of model. At the moment, we're engaging with different stakeholders and seeing what kinds of appetites they are. Largely speaking, we're talking to countries that don't have the money to engage with that. But you could imagine in the future there being something like a tourist tax, especially where it's carbon credits staying within a country and that sort of tying in with the country's footprint, and that kind of approach might work, I think, in the future. But it might be a bit early. It's a bit early for us to say, like, this is definitely what the carbon dioxide removal piece looks like. This is what the tourism income piece looks like, and then figuring out where the carbon credits and additionalities and exactly kind of what activity lies where ends up being. We're very focused on the carbon dioxide removal angle because we think there's just so much potential in the sargassum itself to learn, and then also in seaweed more broadly for carbon dioxide removals on a much larger scale.
It's really interesting what you said about the costs as well of cleanup, because I tried to get a grip on this a few years back, and it's really difficult to get accurate numbers because everyone who's involved in the industry who's having to remove this seaweed is downplaying the problem. Because if you say that I'm spending this amount on removing all this seaweed, it's not just the boast, but you're actually raising awareness of the problem. So people are actually downplaying the problem. I mean, there's very little social media on sargassum when COVID hit, for example, because tourists weren't traveling. So the problem went away. Whereas it's back with a vengeance this year as the whole world is reopened, really. So it's really interesting to sort of try and get a grip on it. And at the same time, if you look at the people who are trying to help out on the beaches, saying, I removed X number of tons, people take a lot of pride in that. So they say, well, maybe instead of removing 1 truckload, I removed 10 truckloads, just to show that they're really, really helping. So getting accurate numbers on the cost is really, really challenging. So
it seems like it has an advantage over other carbon removal methods because the environmental justice component of this seems pretty straightforward. I can imagine for other types of carbon removal, the siting has a potential neo-colonial concern. People are worried about people coming in and changing the demographics or economy in some sort of damaging or just unwelcome way. And this seems like it's actually solving a problem for people who are most impacted, and thus is able, unless you're doing something pretty foolish, able to sidestep a lot of these concerns and actually be involved in addressing them rather than just being neutral. It seems like potentially even a straightforward positive. Is this an accurate read?
Yeah. We think so. I mean, it's definitely
I pushed it over the plate a little bit, but yeah.
Yeah.
You're just doing their PR for them.
Are you good?
I was just thinking, we need Ross on the
team. We try to be good. Yeah, we definitely see this, and one of the reasons why we decided to do this was because of the terrible side effects that it's causing. And Mike's been working in this, like you said, for 9 years now.
Yeah. I mean, a theme throughout my research career has been trying to make cleanup operations pay for themselves, and actually, especially in the areas where local governments can't afford the cleanup operations, the problems are allowed to fester. So this is the culmination of about 20 years of work. Yeah,
he's a good guy. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely one of those problems that you look at and you say, like, this is horrible. There's no... When it beaches, and it isn't necessarily an enormous problem when it's out at sea, it is significantly less diverse than the Sargassum Sea because there is sort of one primary species which is winning, I suppose, as an invasive species, which means that it's not quite as much of I'd say much less of a vibrant habitat. But when it comes into the coast, it's causing human health problems, it's causing complete destruction of ecosystems, it's destroying tourism. It's even so bad in some places that the fishing boat physically can't get out into the sea. So, the knock-on effects that it's having they can be really tremendous. And that's in the last year or so, like, it's been something that's for me become something that I look at and go, oh my goodness, this is like very anxiety inducing in the way that sort of general climate change can be. So that's it's not great when it comes in very, very large amounts, and it's doing so on an increasingly regular basis.
I really love what you said about the kind of justice components here, because as is common with climate change and effects of climate change, is a lot of these coastal communities that have contributed the least are bearing the worst brunt of climate change. And as you point out, really this is being caused by runoff and fertilizers, largely from the Amazon, is my understanding, and from Brazil's deforestation projects. And yet here it is impacting, small island nations. Speak to us a little bit about this pilot you have going. Is it with Antigua?
Yeah, we're going to Antigua next month, or Alfie is going to Antigua next month, and we'll take some time to get there. So we're starting in May to do our first in full robot trials of interception and sinking, and start to take baseline data of the areas where we'll hopefully be doing the sinking longer term. Yeah, absolutely, like you say, there's just a lot of these small island nations that are being terribly, terribly impacted in an increasingly consistent way. If you go down a bit further south to sort of Barbados and St. Lucia, which are lovely places. The sargassum's coming in almost all year now. You can see it on the satellite kind of swirling around and not really going away, which it used to when this problem first started in 2011. So we're very hopeful that the pilot will go very well and that we'll be able to demonstrate that we can intercept and sink in a consistent and efficient way with Alfie. And then, we'd like to open up the opportunity for other areas to host pilot, especially because for us, like, the purpose of doing a pilot is to learn as quickly as we can. So if we can run more of them in different places, that means that we can have more consistent and ongoing learnings happening. Whereas if we've got one place, we have to wait for the sargassum to come at the right time and then go and learn as much as we can as quickly as possible. So yeah, we hope to expand to more areas quite quickly.
This is so in line with so many of the conversations we've been having about carbon removal, where you guys sound relatively confident about the technology and you're developing this really interesting project, and it comes down to the business model innovations and the social acceptability and the climate justice and sort of who's responsible elements that it sounds like are maybe, I mean, you didn't say this directly, but are also like incredibly difficult knots that you're working on. So that just so tracks with what we've been talking about, where there's obviously, I'm sure you're having technological challenges, but there's these other bigger questions of how to even fund it and how to even exist that are maybe even more complicated.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's been, and maybe we can sort of talk about this more broadly, but there's been a shift, I think, in the last few months, really, from direct air capture and sort of closed system carbon dioxide removal being the most popular, probably because they're the most measurable and they have, you can account for sort of every molecule. And what we're looking at is really like a very open system, which is completely the other end of the spectrum, which it felt like for a bit there wasn't being pushed forward as much as the closed system approaches. And I think now we're starting to see some traction and some momentum in the direction of people accepting that we do have to, if we're going to get to this very large amount of carbon dioxide removal, start to explore open systems. But we must do that very thoughtfully. In our case, I think with biomass sinking in the oceans, albeit of a problematic one, which should be beneficial overall because it's causing so much damage on the coast, we still need to make sure that we're getting buy-in, that we're properly explaining what we're doing, and that we're, most importantly, proving what we're doing and then tracking it and making sure that what we think is going to happen in the deep ocean and what we think the effects of it are going to be, which are, we think, very minimal or we wouldn't be doing this, are indeed the case. So there's lots and lots of measurement, verification, reporting, monitoring involved in our plans. And also we hope that a lot of those findings will, first of all, be quite clear, and secondly, we will disseminate them quite widely because, like you say, it's not just does the technology work and can we remove carbon this way, but also is it acceptable? How do people socially view it? And I mean, in a sense, really just trying to move forward thoughtfully and be in a position where people feel like they can trust us, but probably most importantly, being able to move the whole industry forward at the same time, because we're not going to be the only people in the world that do this by a long, long shot. And the last thing this industry needs is someone kind of running out there and like sticking a flag in the ground and going, I'm going to go and do this. And then everyone else go, wait a minute, that doesn't seem like a great idea. So what we're really trying to do is like bring people on the journey with us and be as open as possible. And I mean, hand on heart, if this turns out to not be a great idea, I think it's a thing that we shouldn't do. And I hope that Seaweed Generation will turn around and say, actually, we've tried it and we don't think it's a great idea, but we can use seaweed for these other things instead. So that's kind of, I suppose, the stance. We're trying to be quite pragmatic about it, I suppose.
From two different angles, how's the reception been from people who live in Antigua? I read a book years ago, maybe you know her, Jamaica Kincaid. She wrote a book called A Small Place. She's an Antiguan writer, but quite critical of the tourist trade and like off-islander involvement. And then also, how's been your reception at the carbon removal community? I know seaweed sinking, biomass sinking has had its share of headwinds here. Is this something that you've seen as well? answering these two questions will take the rest of the show, so I can now just go on mute.
Just
go.
We'll just hang here and discuss. So from the perspective of the Antiguan people that we have interacted with, there's, I would say, and Mike, correct me if you think this is not quite right, I'd say there's generally quite an open-mindedness about people being able to come in and sort of contribute to helping with the problem, some of the problems that they're having on the island. And I don't think that they've been very positive, very open in general to bringing in new technologies, but they certainly want to be at the center of it. You know, like they want to create an economy that will benefit Antigua, and they want to be able to use their ocean space in a way that will be good for their future. And I think that's absolutely fair. So whilst we're kind of doing pilots and we're developing a technology, like they are our partners, or they will be our partners in there.
This is a massive problem in these island nations. But as we're talking here, it's a massive opportunity as well. And the key thing is that it's an opportunity for the island nations, not just Seaweed Generation. And our journey will be sort of doing it together. And a big part of what we're doing in my role is the education side of things, and developing citizen science programs and developing a whole seaweed bioeconomy across the region. Because once this sargassum is gone, because, you know, ideally in 20, 30, 40 years, we'll have removed so much of this sargassum that it'll be manageable. But then we've got perfect ground for growing seaweed, but the seaweeds that we want in controlled manner. So to do that, we need the local communities. So we need to be working together. And that's really important to what we're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I second that for sure. And I think there's a lot of excitement. I guess if you think about the way that these island nations tend to be set up, they're quite small land masses with massive amounts of water. And the only thing that's been done economically speaking, or the biggest thing that's been done economically speaking with those waters, is fishing, which is at the moment under quite a lot of stress, and the fish stocks are quite low. Oh, yeah, and the second is tourism.
Isn't like Trinidad like big in oil? And like there's some oil production happening too. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a bit of oil and sort of like of mining in the ocean space. There's not so much in Antigua, I don't think, but in some areas there are. Now, if there's an opportunity to start doing carbon dioxide removals, growing seaweed biomass, expanding that blue economy, that's quite exciting to a lot of these places. And will, you know, likely, like Mike says, make up a big part of what they're able to do in the future, and what we would like to, you know, help develop the technology to do. And then the second very meaty question with me.
Yeah, sorry about that. It's not good hosting. No, I'll be the first to say. Yeah.
So I think there's sort of two main buckets of carbon dioxide removal thinking, I suppose. And it's actually maps quite succinctly to the closed system and the open system techniques that I alluded to before. There are people in the industry who much prefer closed loop systems and very, very measurable, very sort of, where's this molecule going from here to there, and exactly kind of, you know, being able to say without a shadow of a doubt that this is happening to this thing. And then there are people who appreciate on a more broad scale that we need to do this on a massive scale, and that every approach really does need to be explored. And we're too early to be able to throw out approaches. And people who sort of step back and look at the problem who are saying sort of, you know, 10 billion tons is an awful lot. How are we going to do that? Well, look, the Earth system has been doing a pretty good job of that for an awfully long time already. And people who think that way are much more, you know, comfortable and excited about the approach that we're taking, especially because really what we're trying to do is learn about, you know, seaweed biomass thinking and what does that mean. So I think more people are starting to become comfortable with the idea of open systems, and I'd expect, or we hope that will continue, at least to the point where we can start getting data and reporting back on our findings.
I think people are okay with it as long as it isn't participating in carbon accounting strictly. So companies are emitting fossil tons that we can measure, and there's an indeterminate amount going through an open system and that we don't really fully understand. But I find when you relax the standard of, okay, we're doing a ton for ton carbon accounting negation scheme for balancing our carbon budget, I think the enthusiasm goes up a fair amount. Also, I love that Di Ellis and John Sanchez piece that just came out on,
yes.
Yeah, we're coming for you, as Christoph used to say. We should do an episode on that. But yeah, I hope that's true. I know there's a tendency to really want to know exactly what's happening, and it makes sense. It's an honorable impulse, but it's also pretty limiting too. And it boxes us in to attack that, while easy to measure, may not be the most effective way to go in all cases. It's a case of where, how's the expression go? It's from measure what matters. It's like it's like the thing that you can measure, you will optimize for and you will max out. It's like the kill ratio in Vietnam. Like it didn't actually translate into whether or not the US was winning or not. It was just like, how many bodies are there on the ground after a battle? And then it turns out many of them had weapons on them. It turns out they were all VC. Every single person who died was VC. Of course, that was not true, but it was easy to measure. And so it gets maximized. And that was the most.
I love that was your analogy. You went dark on that analogy there, Ross. Let's go back to Wall-E.
Is that the bit you're going to edit out for being absolutely
reality of man? Reality of man here. They put metal jacket on you as well.
Sometimes we talk about how to distinguish between all the other climate podcasts out there, and I don't think you're getting carbon accounting to Vietnam War comparisons on many other podcasts. So, folks,
it is what I do.
Come for the great guest, stay for Ross's historical analogies.
Well, I'm a little curious. Mike, you said you've been working on this for 20 years, and so it's pretty clear that this is your passion project. This is your area of focus. How did you rope Patty in, or did she rope you in, or how did that all come about?
So I said I've bbeen working on this concept for 20 years. I've been working on sargassum for just under 10, because these blooms have only been going
just under 10.
Just under 10. But
10's a long time, a whole decade.
That's a long time in science. A lot can happen. The Great Atlantic Sargassum Belt is only about 12 years old. It's a relatively new phenomenon. So I couldn't have been working on it for 20 years. But the mindset is in this approach, this style of approach. So basically, Paddy and I always have a laugh about this, but I'm apparently a B-list celebrity in the seaweed world. And when Paddy wanted to get into seaweed, she found me and asked if I'd do a podcast, which is now somewhere on YouTube. And we had a chat about seaweed, and I was telling her...
And what did you say to me?
I can't remember exactly. Would you like to paraphrase it?
I could paraphrase. So we didn't get this on video. Our second conversation was what we did the podcast on. But he basically told me I was totally mental. And why would you want to grow more seaweed? Because I wanted to start with cultivation when there was this huge problem, and go and look at this problem and find me something to do with it. So I did.
So I've been coming at it from here is some sargassum. I need to put it into a product, and a physical product. And I'd been trying to make that work for ages, and I just couldn't make it work. And then Paddy sort of wandered along into my world and just said, carbon dioxide removal. And I was like, oh my God, that's a thing. And then
I was a bit like Wall-E in this.
Yeah. So together we came at it from very, very different points of view, and it was just a match made in heaven, and here we are now discussing it on this podcast. So.
I'm really excited that there is this concept of taking an existing problem and bringing in carbon dioxide removal, because obviously we already have the existing problem of too many parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere, right? That exists. But so many solutions that we're looking at are focused on getting those molecules out of the atmosphere and storing them, biosphere, lithosphere, somewhere away from the atmosphere. But that you're almost coming from the sargassum problem, and then the CO2 removal is almost like the co-benefit, it seems. It almost seems like the primary thing is getting rid of the sargassum, and then the CO2 becomes the co-benefit. Ross, you're giving me a look. Is that what you're going to say?
Is there anything else like that, actually, where carbon removal is the co-benefit? Is there any other case that is, I guess maybe regenerative ag is something kind of like that too? Is there anything that's...
Well, biochar has existed for way longer than the carbon removal.
Of course, you have to come in with the biochar.
Kind of similar in a way, burying biomass.
We're actually very similar to the biochar, but much more intelligent. In that we don't have to.
Well, edit that out.
No, that's the title. That's the title.
No, that's Python talk. We're the thinking person's biochar. But essentially, with biochar, you take biomass and you char it so it's biologically unavailable, and then you store it essentially in a very biologically available area, which is why you have to char it. Of course, we're storing it in the deep ocean, which is not sort of available to the surface cycle. So we don't have to char it. So we don't have any of those energetic costs of charring it. So we're effectively, it's much more simple and effective in terms of carbon capture. So
yeah, it's definitely very efficient. I think our it's solar powered automated robot without having to actually really process anything it's the LCA is pretty good.
We haven't gotten sort of I'm sure folks can look at your website, but just like the short version of how it works. I mean, it's a robot that sinks seaweed, but what are the steps? How does it get it? I don't even really quite know.
Mike, you want to take that one or shall I?
Yeah, I'll take that one, and then Paddy can correct me.
So good.
Basically, our robot takes the seaweed, which is floating on the surface of the water, collects it, and then it takes it down to about 200 meters down, just in a vertical translocation. And at that point, the pressure of the water compresses the seaweed so it no longer can float. Just like if a diver was taken from the surface and put 200 meters down, they'd all feel that compression on their head. The seaweed is compacted, the air in it is compacted, and it basically sinks down. And we do that in areas of around 4,000 meters deep. So the seaweed goes to the very, very deep ocean. And if you think about the distance, 4 or 5 kilometers from the top for the water there, basically once that material is down there, it can't move to the top again. So it's effectively removed from the surface cycle. So it's a very, very simple process. There's no biological, chemical processing. It's just a physical translocation, and we let physics do the rest. And it's essentially mimicking the biological pump, which is nature's way of storing carbon anyway. And that's why the deep oceans has about 37 trillion tons of carbon, which is far more than anywhere else on the planet. So
and what mechanism pushes it down to the 200 feet or meters or
gravity?
So it comes into the robot, and then something. What pushes? How does that? Is there
the robot goes down?
Oh, okay. That's what I wasn't getting. Okay, I understand.
The robot moves down 200
Oh, cool.
meters. So at about 135 meters, the balance between floating sargassum becoming sinking sargassum occurs. We take it to 200 to make sure and release it from there, and then the robot will go back to the surface and do the same again. So it'll do that 4 times an hour, 12 hours a day, just slowly nibbling away, Wall-E style, Pac-Man Roomba style also.
You're going to have to name the next one Wall-E.
We're going to have to name the next one Wall-E. Another thing that the alga ray does is it films every one of those drop events and gathers data for it. So we take that data and then give it as proof, or one of our MRV points for people who are purchasing carbon dioxide removal, which is, we think a really important part of it is reporting back the data.
And what about cost? This sounds expensive. Robots sound expensive. Talk to me about costs now, and what is your projected hopes and dreams for future costs, which is how I would frame it to any CDR company. What are your hopes and dreams in the future cost?
Our hopes and dreams. So at the moment we're selling tons for about $250, and that's across the first 3 years of vintage, which I still just can't get over. I love that we call them vintages. We're projecting with the larger version of Alfie that we'll be able to bring the costs down below $100 a ton pretty quickly. And that's mostly due to the fact that it's just so reusable. Everything that we're building is reused over and over and over and over and over again. So there's nothing else is being dropped into the ocean apart from the sargassum. And then everything is solar powered, so there's not really fuel costs ongoing. So the largest cost we have is maintenance as we keep going with the robots. We are projecting that we'll be able to produce them for around $100,000 to $150,000 per robot, and they'll be dropping around, or they'll be removing around 8,000 tons of carbon per year. So $100 a ton, the sort of return rate on that is quite short. That's our hope and dream. So we'll see if that actually turns into reality. The current version of Alfie we've produced for $30,000, so that's pretty cost effective.
What are the regulatory rules and regimes you have to contend with to run these? I just know it's very complicated with ocean stuff.
Yeah, is it London Protocol mostly, or what else are you looking at?
Well, we're working in exclusive economic zones of countries. So we're within the legal jurisdiction of in the pilot case, Antigua and Barbuda. And the vast majority of the Caribbean gets well below the 1,000 meters of depth, which is the kind of deep ocean delineation. We're trying to optimize for deeper than that because that just means longer term carbon dioxide removal. But for the most part, we'll be working with countries who are having a problem with sargassum in their exclusive economic zone to deal with the problem. At least, for the foreseeable future, that's the plan.
There's this organization or company, I'm not sure, called the Ocean Cleanup, and they've gotten like a lot of press. They collect the garbage in the Pacific, like garbage gyre with those, like, I just kind of feel like there's some parallel there. Are you guys like aware of what they do? Have you looked at their technology? I mean, I'm just kind of not knowing much about this space. I'm just curious what you kind of think of that, or if you've been aware of that.
It's really interesting what they do, but their problem is not a biomass that they're intercepting. It's basically a plastic product. So whereas we can just sink in situ because it's a natural biomass, they unfortunately have to take it out of the ocean and take it away and either recycle it or make it into expensive products that people can wear as fleeces and things and try and subsidize the process. So it's similar on the surface, quite literally, but it's a very different process that we're actually doing. But I think it's great that people are starting to put a profile on the ocean and the cleanup. And the more care that's put into restoring the ocean environment, the better the world will be. 70% of the planet is covered in water, so we need to start sort of taking care of it. And the more people like that are active, the better, I think.
Just how can people get in touch with you, or if people want to get involved, or if people want to support you? What are your immediate needs that you want to put out to our audience?
Well, that's a good question. So we're always looking to talk to more countries and states and honestly local governments that are having issues with this. So if anybody's in Mexico, Belize, Florida, probably Louisiana fairly soon, or any of the Caribbean nations, please get in touch. There's a contact on our website. And then we'd love to chat to scientists, anyone who's out there thinking about, doing some ocean research and they want to come and do some deep ocean observations in our pilot site. That'd be awesome. And anyone who wants to buy carbon dioxide removal, we are here. We're doing small pre-sales to mostly pay for the pilots and for the next kind of couple of years of testing and that kind of stuff. So yeah, please get in touch.
Well, thanks so much for listening. I hope you had a great time with us learning about seaweed. We really don't cover ocean stuff and seaweed stuff nearly enough. There's a lot of interesting work happening over there. Send this to a friend. Help us get the word out. Give us a great rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. That also helps us quite a lot. And thanks so much for listening. Have a lovely day. Thank you so much for listening. If you could please subscribe and give us a great rating and review on Apple Podcasts or a rating on Spotify, that'd be much appreciated. It helps us get our content out to more people. You can sign up for our newsletter at nori.com, follow us on social media, and we will catch you next time.